Hey everyone, we're at the InWin booth now at CES 2020, and there's a couple of things that are affordable for plebs like all of us, and then there's also the $14,500 case behind me that we'll be talking about as well. Before that, this video is brought to you by Gigabyte's X570 Master motherboard. The X570 Master is what we use for all of our Ryzen 3000 CPU reviews and for extreme overclocking streams with the 3900X. The Master is built to handle more current than you'll push through your Ryzen CPUs. It has actual finned heatsinks for the VRMs, and it features a massively overhauled Gigabyte BIOS. Pick up the X570 Master for your Ryzen 3000 CPU at the link in the description below. So for the peasants among us that include everybody watching this, there's a B1 case, it's mini-ITX we'll talk about, it's $85 range. There's 3 new ATX cases that are also in the more affordable sub $100 category. And then for those of you who are either, I guess, companies that partner with InWin or incredibly wealthy, this is, the English name is Butterfly, or Dia is the Chinese name for it, but it's a case that has some, it's a signature series case. You might remember the H Tower that InWin had previously. Bob Stewart and Rod Rosenberg worked with that case years and years ago, where it kind of unfolded out like a transformer. This has some of the concepts of that, where it's got the motors up top, and you'll see it in B-roll, but these plexi wings, I guess we'll call them, kind of fold up and down. It can take a facial recognition, it does motion sensing, and also has speech recognition, and then is, for those of you who like spying devices in your house, it's also Alexa compatible. But on the bottom for the stand, which by the way is included because otherwise you'd be in trouble, the bottom is a projector screen, 720p projector mounted on the underside of the case where there's some other buttons as well, and you can have it play movies and stuff like that. I'm going to attempt to do what one should never attempt to do in a video and try to activate this. It's also loud in here. We'll see how it goes. Light show 1. I think it worked. I think, there we go. Whew, okay, that was intense. So it does different light shows. It's got stuff pre-programmed. My understanding is that there's supposed to be some customization for buyers as well if you wanted to customize it. At 14.5 grand, I have to imagine that, like most of the signature cases, this is something that's more of a Halo product to get a lot of attention, obviously. And then we do see stuff, I'm gonna step away from the music so we don't get demonetized. We do see stuff like the H Tower pop up at other booths from time to time, like at the HyperX booth, it's still on display. So it's a cool case. In terms of configuration, the left side is motherboard and video card, all the main components. The right side has actually a new CLC from InWin we'll be talking about as well, a closed loop liquid cooler, and power supply and SSD, so it's kind of compartmentalized, split between them. If you look closely at the top, it's got all the wiring and motors, and I did ask, oh yeah, and the speaker is at the bottom. I did ask how long this was in development for, because it is a complex project. Even if it's not something most people buy, it's still cool. And the answer was about 10 months for the idea. I don't know how long it took to actually build it, but it's probably gonna be built to order. I really doubt there's tooling made for this type of thing. So yeah, low volume product that's cool and interesting, and the goal is to ultimately bring some of the stuff in here down to the lower end cases. That's normally what Halo products are for. So what InWin's gonna do with it, I don't know. I asked, and the answer I got for what do you think you'll do with motion sensors or voice controller recognition in lower end cases, it was, we have a lot of crazy ideas. So I'm excited to see those in the lower end stuff. I'll give one example where we've seen motion sensing before. In the Cooler Master C700M, there's a motion sensor on the front of it that turns the case on when you walk by it. So anyway, that's the Butterfly case. I think we covered most of that. Let's move on to some of the more affordable stuff. For the mini-ITX fans out there, there is a new case from InWin. We've most recently worked with the A1, which is a significantly larger version of a mini-ITX case than what's here. This is called the B1. It's, I've got dimensions here. It measures in at 108 by 302 by 338 millimeters, and maybe in editing we can throw up freedom units for those of you who prefer those. But for the configuration, it's extremely space efficient. It's pretty much all the space is utilized for the components. There's a small 80 millimeter fan on my left side over here. This is configured as exhaust, and then there's no intake, so it's a negative pressure setup, so you're pulling in your air from the bottom just by pressure. They're using a Downdraft fan, which probably everyone, well, definitely everyone will be using given the size of the case. So Downdraft fan plus exhaust. You have intake over on the other side where actually there is a power supply as well, blocking a good portion of that, I just noticed. But there's a dust filter down in the bottom, which is one of the, sadly, better thought out dust filter placements I've seen this show, because this show we've seen a lot of dust filters in front of or at the back of exhaust fans and fewer in front of intake. So this has at least positioned it properly, which is always nice to see, basic understanding of where dust goes. But yeah, it's a small case. It's supposed to be $85. Availability looks like March. It includes the 200 watt thin PSU that's in the bottom of the case. And then for the rest, I think as long as you go with a lower power consumption part for your APU or CPU IGP, whatever you want to call it, it's probably going to be okay. I'd be careful of doing higher TDP or higher wattage parts just because it is pretty limited intake, but you can always flip around the 80 mil fan and set that as intake and then let the air exhaust out wherever it can find places, which would mostly be the IO. So that's the B1. It follows up the A1, but much smaller. And I think now we can move over to the 3 new ATX cases that are more in the mid-tower category. So these are Inwin's sub $100 mid-tower cases. Inwin doesn't do a whole lot of enclosures that are in the affordable category. For the ones it does, it's typically stuff like the B1 or the A1, but we don't see a ton of ATX sub $100 Inwin cases. The tooling is more or less the same. I think this one might be slightly different in the current version, and some stuff is still potentially subject to change, but for the most part, these cases internally are going to be the same. It's the exterior that changes and potentially fan configuration, but it sounds like they might be fanless right now. For pricing, the C200 is supposed to be an $80 enclosure. The two to my right are going to be the 215 and the 216, and those are supposed to be $70 enclosures. For availability, looks like Q1. I guess my concerns with these, I'll be honest with these. The vertical GPU mount that's in the 215 and 216, it's not in the C200 actually, but I don't know if that's going to change. Vertical GPU mount, we normally say don't use in general for any case if it's an air-cooled card. If it's water-cooled, you can get away with it because there's no fans on it, so it doesn't need airflow, and you can brute force it. The radiator takes care of all of it. Air-cooled card, I would not set up this way because it is about 1 millimeter to half a millimeter away from the glass. So you're for sure dropping a lot of clocks off a card configured that way. So I wouldn't do that. And then the front does concern me a bit on the intake. I hope that Inwin can kind of improve the ventilation and airflow for its budget cases going forward. I know the 303 had a really interesting layout where it was mostly bottom focused for fan placement. The front didn't do a whole lot, but so that configuration was okay and works out reasonably if you really work at setting it up properly. But yeah, for these, I need to see a lot more in terms of the ventilation. It's kind of got the cheaper thick plastic on the top, cheap thick plastic on the front, not enough hole, too much plastic. So we'll see how these do. Let's move on to the last thing they've got here for us to look at, which is a liquid cooler. Finally, for the liquid coolers, this is Inwin's first attempt at CLCs or AIOs if you prefer. The most obvious immediate thing is the proud pump block. So this has 2 pumps in it, which I think run in parallel from what I understand. There's actually an explosion diagram up here. So you can see the impellers on either side. You've got 2 impellers, gasket, a couple more gaskets over there, the black rubber, obviously. There's at least PCB in the center for all the power, and then I think these might be additional PCBs that connect to the motor or the electromagnet. So it's tall, and I'm really curious to see how dual pump works. It's supposed to be a 2,400 RPM pump or so for each one, I think. So we'll see. In theory, pump speed should affect performance because with a single pump, say Asetek Gen 5, Gen 6 cooler, we've seen you move from high speed, like 20-something, 100 RPM, pump speed down to a silent by NZXT standards, for example, and there is some decay in thermal performance. So moving the liquid faster to a degree can help, and this is something I do want to test because it's something I haven't seen before in a CLC. So these are called the SR24 and 36, 24 and 36 being the 240 and 360 millimeter solutions. The fans you see on here are the stock fans, so this is more or less how the products will ship. Pricing should be $120 for the 240, should be $140 for the 360, and releases Q1. And I do want to test these because they're different, and different's a good thing when you're talking closed loop liquid coolers, which have mostly been Asetek or Cool It. So that's the Inwin booth. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. As always, go to store.gamersnexus.net to help us out directly, and I'll see you all next time.